Nebraska Territory, spring of 1871. The wind carried dust and silence across the open prairie when Barrett Jameson rode east under a sky that had not tasted rain in weeks. His horse moved slow, like it felt the weight in his chest. The last town he left was Delmore, and he had not spoken to another soul since. The world felt hollow to him now. Once, he had been a man of conviction, clear eyes, steady hands, a Bible tucked in his saddlebag. But war, hunger, and graves had taken that from him. He buried his parents in Missouri, his younger brother in the Dakota hills, and the last woman who ever called him home in a field of wild asters. After that, he stopped praying. He did not expect to find anything on the prairie that morning. Certainly not the woman kneeling beside a broken wagon, her skirts dust-covered, her palms scraped raw. But there she was. She lifted her head as he crested the rise, her hat gone, her hair coming loose in the wind. "Hey," she called out, waving an arm. "Please wait." Barrett slowed his horse, but did not dismount. "You need help?"
"Yes."
"My wheel's broken. I cannot lift it myself," she said. Her voice was strong, not desperate, but there was a tightness at the corners of her mouth that told him she was holding herself together by a thread. He looked past her. A crooked wagon leaned at an angle, one wheel split straight through. Two children sat in its shade, a boy and girl maybe 6 or 7, both quiet, watching him with wide eyes. The girl clutched a rag doll. The boy held a stick like it was a sword. "You alone out here?" Barrett asked. The woman stood. "My name is Eliza Palmer. My husband died in Illinois. We were headed to his cousin's homestead near Kearney. The man we were traveling with abandoned us 2 nights ago." "Left you with a broken wheel and 2 children?" Barrett asked, his voice low. "My children," she said simply. He was not their father. Barrett dismounted. His boots hit the dirt with a thud. "You should have stayed near town." "I know," she said. "But I did not have the coin for a room. And I could not wait. My son is sick. He has fever. I need to get him somewhere safer." He walked to the wagon. The boy's cheeks were flushed. "What's his name?" Barrett asked.
"Kellen," she said.
"His sister's name is Katie." Barrett crouched beside the wheel, ran a hand along the splintered wood. The axle was intact. "If you have a spare, I can fix this." Eliza nodded, her eyes softening.
"Ida."
"In the back. I just could not lift it." Barrett worked without speaking much. The children watched him, Katie inching closer, quiet and curious. At one point, she offered him a biscuit from a small tin. He took it and nodded once. Eliza stayed close, knees in the dirt, steadying the wagon as he worked. Her skirts brushed his arm once, and it stirred something deep in his chest. He tried to ignore it. When he finished, he stood, brushing dust from his hands. "Wheel's good now. You can make it to Kearney, but you should not travel without another wagon. It is too far." She stood beside him, face flushed from sun and worry. "How far are you headed?" "I was not headed anywhere," Barrett said truthfully. Her eyes met his. "Would you ride with us?" "Just until the next town." He hesitated. "I do not. I can pay you something," she added quickly. "Not much. But we have food." "I do not want your money," he said. "Then do it for my children," she said. "Please." Barrett looked at the boy, curled now beneath a blanket, and the girl who had not stopped watching him. Then he looked at the woman who had not begged, not even once, but had asked with everything she had left in her. He gave a slow nod. "All right. I will ride with you." That night, they made camp near a stand of cottonwoods. Eliza set a pot of beans on the coals while Barrett kept watch. The stars came out, sharp and cold. Katie fell asleep in her mother's lap. Kellen coughed through his dreams. "You are kind," Eliza said softly. "I am not," Barrett replied. She looked at him, her face lit by firelight. You do not know what you are anymore? He shook his head. I used to believe in things. In God. In good men. And now, I believe in finishing what I start. She smiled faintly, brushing hair from Katie's forehead. Maybe that is all faith is. Just not giving up. Barrett did not answer. But later, when Eliza laid her son beside his sister and covered them both, she sat beside Barrett in the silence. He did not move away. When the wind picked up, she wrapped her shawl tighter and leaned an inch closer. Not enough to touch, but enough to feel the warmth at her side. Barrett looked at her, really looked this time, the tired strength in her eyes, the way she carried her fear like it was something she had already made peace with. He had not prayed in years, but sitting beside her, he thought maybe he could again. The sun rose slow and red, dragging its light across the earth like it was reluctant to begin again. Barrett stirred from his bedroll before the children woke. He didn't speak when he stood, didn't need to. The quiet between him and Eliza hadn't frayed overnight, it had settled deeper, like roots pressing into dry soil. He led his horse a ways off, filled its nose back, then walked to the edge of the cottonwood grove. The river nearby had thinned to a slow trickle, but it was enough to wash the dust from his hands and face. When he returned, Eliza was tending to her son, folding a damp cloth across his forehead with a tenderness that made Barrett's chest ache. You find water? She asked without looking up. Enough, he said. There's a bend near the eastern bank. Might be deeper farther down. She nodded and wrung the cloth again. His fever won't break. I don't like the sound in his chest either. You had quinine or anything for it? He asked.
No, she said.
I used what little I had 2 days ago. Barrett crouched beside the fire, feeding it with dry twigs. There's a trapper's post near the Platte. Might have something there. We're about a day and a half out. Eliza looked up then. Do you think he'll make it that far? Barrett didn't answer right away. He watched the flame catch and curl, sending up a thin line of smoke. If we keep him shaded and still, maybe. She stood, brushing her hands on her apron. Then we move slow. But we move. They broke camp with quiet efficiency. Katie handed her brother a piece of bread and curled up beside him in the back of the wagon without being told. Barrett rode ahead, eyes sharp on the horizon. The trail was hard-packed and mostly clear, though the wind kicked grit into the wagon's wake. By midday, the boys' breathing had thinned into shallow pulls. Eliza rode beside Barrett for a stretch, her shoulders straight, but her voice low. He's always been the fragile one, she said. Born early, barely the weight of a sack of flour. Barrett glanced at her. And the girl? Elbowed her way into the world, like she owned it. I swear she was scowling before she took her first breath. He smiled faintly, then turned his face back to the land. They got their grit from somewhere. I didn't have much choice, she said. My father was a printer's apprentice. Never made much. I married young. Too young. Thought I was escaping something, but I walked into worse. Barrett didn't press her. He didn't need the whole story to understand the shape of it. After a long silence, she asked, And you? You said you weren't headed anywhere. I wasn't, he said. What changed? Barrett looked toward the wagon. He needed medicine. You needed help. That's not what I meant. He didn't answer, but the line of his jaw tightened. They didn't speak again until evening, when the wagon creaked to a halt beside a narrow stream lined with stones. Eliza laid her son down on a folded quilt, smoothed his hair back with a mother's care. Barrett fetched water and rinsed the pot clean, then set beans to boil again, this time with a sliver of salt pork he hadn't offered the night before. As dusk approached, Katie wandered toward the fire, dragging her doll by one arm. She settled beside Barrett without saying a word. He handed her a warm biscuit, and she took it with both hands like it might break if she wasn't careful. You don't talk much, she said, mouth full. Don't have much to say, he replied. You got a wife? She asked. Barrett shook his head. Why not? Never found the right person. She chewed thoughtfully, then nodded once. Mama says the right person don't always come when you want 'em. Sometimes they come when you need 'em. Barrett looked toward Eliza, who was bent over her son again, her brow furrowed in worry. That's so, he murmured. Later, after the children were asleep, Eliza sat across from Barrett, her knees drawn up beneath her skirt. She looked tired in a way that went beyond the body tired in her bones, in her hope. I used to think if I worked hard enough, prayed hard enough, carried everything quiet, I'd be all right, she said. That God would reward endurance. Barrett didn't lift his eyes from the fire. And now, I think God's quieter than I thought. Maybe he's waiting for us to stop talking and start listening. Barrett stirred the coals with a stick, the heat warming the side of his face. I stopped listening a long time ago. Maybe it's not too late to start again. The wind shifted, tugging a lock of her hair loose. She didn't bother tucking it back. Barrett looked at her, then not just at her face, but at the way she held herself upright even after everything. At the way she'd slept lightly all night, always half listening for her children. At the way she hadn't asked for pity or rescue, only partnership. You're not what I expected, he said. She smiled, but it was worn through with exhaustion. Neither are you. They sat in quiet until the fire burned low. Somewhere behind them, a child turned in sleep, murmuring. Eliza stood first. Good night, Barrett. He nodded. Rest if you can. I'll keep watch. She hesitated, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer than it needed to. Then she turned and disappeared into the wagon. Barrett leaned back against his saddle, eyes on the stars overhead. He didn't pray, but he listened. The trapper's post stood where Barrett remembered it, low-roofed, half-sunken into a rise along the Platte's northern bank, its wood gray with age and weather. Smoke drifted from the chimney in a thin, steady line. They arrived near dusk, wagon wheels groaning over the rutted earth, Kellen too fevered to lift his head. Barrett dismounted without a word and approached the door. A dog barked once from within, then quieted. The door creaked open to reveal a man with a beard to his chest and an old Henry rifle cradled in his arms. He squinted at Barrett, then lowered the barrel a hair. Barrett Jameson, he said. I thought you were halfway to Texas. Didn't take, Barrett replied. You still keep medicine? The man stepped aside. Depends what's wrong. Barrett turned slightly, gesturing toward the wagon. Boy's lungs are thick with fever. Can't get a full breath. Need something to pull it out. The trapper Clem, Barrett recalled, nodded once and disappeared into the dark interior. When he returned, he held a small tin of powdered willow bark and a parcel wrapped in oilskin. Boil the bark. Mix in the powder. It'll ease him some. No miracles, mind you. Barrett handed over a coin. Clem waited, then glanced past him toward the wagon. You riding with a woman and two young uns now? Just for a while, Barrett said. Wouldn't have pegged you for company. Barrett didn't answer. He took the parcel, nodded once, and turned away. Eliza was seated beside Kellen, a damp cloth folded across his chest now, her fingers tracing small circles against his ribs. She looked up when Barrett approached, her face unreadable in the fading light. What did he give you? Barrett handed her the bundle. Willow bark, some ground powder. You'll need to boil it steady. She reached for it, careful not to wake her son. Thank you. He crouched near the fire pit and began stacking dry grass and split kindling. Eliza knelt beside him and held the pot as he poured water from his canteen. Their hands brushed only briefly, but it startled them both. She didn't pull away. Katie had wandered to a patch of wild mustard, tugging flowers free and tucking them into the edge of her doll's dress. She hummed softly, spinning in circles, her bare feet kicking up dust. She'll remember this as a game someday, Eliza said, watching her. Kellen won't. But she will. Barrett glanced at the girl. Children remember more than we think. Eliza looked at him. What do you remember? He didn't answer right away. The fire caught, and he leaned back on his heels, watching the flames. My mother's hands. Always warm. Always moving. I remember the way my brother laughed when he was scared, like he was daring whatever it was to come for him. Eliza set the pot over the fire. You're different than I expected. You said that once already. No, she said. Before, I meant you weren't cruel. Now I mean you're gentle. He didn't know what to do with that.
So he looked away.
Later, after the medicine had cooled and Eliza coaxed it between Kellen's lips, she returned to the fire and sat beside Barrett without invitation. He offered her the last of the bread he'd packed from Delmore. She accepted it, eating in silence. You don't carry a Bible, she said. I used to, he replied. What happened to it? He stared into the fire. I left it with a dying man. He asked me to read to him, and I did. When the sun came up, he was gone, and I couldn't carry it any longer. Felt like it didn't belong to me anymore. Eliza folded her hands in her lap. Maybe he gave it back to you in another way. Maybe that's why you stopped when you saw me. Barrett didn't speak. The fire snapped between them, sending sparks into the air. You're not a man without faith, Barrett, she said after a long while. You just carry it different now. He looked at her then, really looked not at the worry in her brow or the dirt beneath her nails, but at the way she saw through him without flinching. He didn't remember the last time someone had done that. She reached out, fingers brushing his wrist. Just once. Just enough to say, I see you. Then she stood, crossed to her children, and lay down beside them. Barrett stayed by the fire until the stars thinned. He didn't pray. Not quite. But he thought of the man he used to be and the woman who'd looked him in the eye like he was still worth something. And somehow, that felt like more than enough. The morning came with a hush, like even the birds sensed something fragile had settled in the air. Kellen's fever had eased some time before dawn, his breathing no longer rasping, only shallow and slow. Eliza sat with a hand on his chest, feeling the rise and fall as if her will alone could keep it going. Barrett had not slept. He'd kept to the edge of the camp, eyes on the path behind them, the rifle across his knees. The quiet had stretched long, but not empty. He could hear the soft rustle of Katie stirring, the water shifting in its pot, the wind moving over the grass like a whisper too low to catch. When Eliza finally stepped away from the wagon, her face was pale and drawn, but different, no longer pulled tight with fear. She joined Barrett near the fire, her shawl wrapped tight. He's better, she said, her voice steady. Barrett nodded once. He'll need rest. We ought to stay here another day.
She didn't argue.
Katie found a bird's egg this morning, blue as her eyes. She tucked it in her satchel like it was porcelain. Barrett let a small breath out through his nose. She's got a way of finding things that don't want to be found. Eliza tilted her head at him. Like you? He looked at her, careful. You think I didn't want to be found? I think you were walking toward nothing until something stepped in your path. Barrett glanced toward the wagon. You believe in fate? I believe in choices, she said. But sometimes we're given the same one over and over until we stop running from it. He didn't respond, but something in his jaw eased. They spent the day by the river. Barrett taught Katie how to skip stones, though she lacked the wrist for it and mostly just made big splashes. Eliza washed out linens near the bend, her hands red from the cold, her sleeves pushed high. Kellen dozed in the wagon, a weak smile twitching at the corner of his mouth now and then, as though he'd caught wind of a dream and was holding tight to it. Later, while Katie napped in the shade and the wind had settled into something gentler, Eliza approached Barrett where he sat sharpening his knife on a flat piece of stone. I've been thinking, she said. You always say dangerous things when you start that way, he replied without looking up. She crouched beside him, close enough that he could smell the sun on her skin. You said you weren't going anywhere when I found you. That's right. If you're still not, then maybe you ought to come with us. when we reached the cousin's place. Barrett paused. You trust him? I've never met him. But it's land, and he wrote that there's room for us. That's more than I had in Illinois. Barrett looked at her then. And you'd rather have a stranger's roof than your own? I'd rather have safety.
And soil.
And time to breathe without listening for footsteps. Barrett ran his thumb along the blade's edge. And you'd want me there? She didn't blink. Kellen calls you the man with the quiet eyes. Katie says you smell like horses and safety. And I. She sat back on her heels. I don't think I want to say goodbye. Barrett stared at the river. The water was brown and slow, tugging at the banks like it didn't know where it belonged. He thought of the years he'd spent drifting, of the graves behind him, of the dust that never quite left his boots, no matter how far he rode. I don't know how to be the kind of man you and those children deserve, he said. Eliza didn't reach for him. She didn't lift her voice or soften her words. She just said, then be the kind you are, and let us decide if that's enough. The wind shifted again, stirring the grass and the hem of her dress. Barrett set the knife aside. I'll ride with you to his land, he said. And if it's not fit, we'll ride farther. Eliza's mouth curved, not into a smile, but something quieter. Something that settled into her bones and stayed there. She stood, brushing the dirt from her skirt. You've got good hands, Barrett Jameson. Steady ones. He met her eyes. They've held too much loss. Then maybe it's time they held something else. Katie stirred in her sleep and called for her mother. Eliza turned, walking back to the wagon without another word. Barrett sat still for a long time after, the river to his right, the fire dying behind him. He didn't reach for the Bible he no longer carried. But he felt something shift in him, slow as the current, sure as the sun. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel lost. They reached the cousin's land 2 days later, the wagon rolling slow beneath an overcast sky. The prairie had the look of early summer, green pushing up through the tired ground, the air thick with the scent of wet grass and river silt. Kellen was stronger, but still leaned against his mother's side, his face pale, his voice quiet. Katie rode beside him, her doll tucked under one arm, watching the land as if trying to decide if it would keep them. The homestead sat low against the horizon, a single sod house built into the rise, smoke winding from its chimney. A mule grazed near a half-finished fence, posts leaning like tired men too long on their feet. A man stepped out of the doorway as they approached, wiping his hands on a rag. He was broad-shouldered, sun-browned, and wore a beard that hadn't seen a proper trim in weeks. You Eliza Palmer? He called, his voice rough but not unkind. I am, she answered as she brought the wagon to a stop. Barrett dismounted, staying close but letting her lead. The man nodded. Name's Samuel. My ma was your husband's aunt. You're welcome here if you can work. I don't have much, but I've got land and no one to help me keep it. Eliza stepped down with care, lifting Kellen into her arms. We can work. Samuel's gaze slid to Barrett. He yours? No, she said. But he's with us. Barrett met the man's eyes without flinching. Samuel didn't press. They stayed. Samuel offered the sod house without hesitation, saying he preferred sleeping in the barn anyway, claimed the mule kept better company. There was no furniture beyond a straw mattress, a table, and 3 chairs all hand-built. A kettle hung from a metal hook above a blackened hearth. Eliza swept the floor before setting down her satchel. Katie touched the walls like she was memorizing the shape of them. Barrett spent the first days mending the fence and clearing stones from the far edge of the field. Samuel said little, but watched him with a quiet nod when the work was done right. Eliza planted beans along the southern edge of the house, mixed with onions and potatoes Samuel had hoarded through the winter. Katie fetched water and picked wild mint from the creek. Kellen spent most of his time under the cottonwood behind the house, a blanket spread beneath him, his chest rising easier now. One evening, after the sun dropped low and the children had fallen asleep, Eliza stepped out into the dusk where Barrett was oiling the hinges on a stall gate. Her dress was damp from laundry, sleeves rolled, hair pinned back with a sliver of bone. "I found her coat," she said, holding it in one hand. "You left it near the hearth." Barrett took it from her, folding it slowly. "Didn't notice I'd lost it." "You don't notice a lot when you're carrying too much." He leaned against the post. "I've been carrying things so long I forget what it's like not to." Eliza stepped closer. "You don't have to anymore." He studied her in the low light. "I don't know how to build a life. I know how to patch wagons, fix a fence, ride from one end of Nebraska to the other without speaking to another soul. But I don't know how to stay." Her voice didn't soften. "Then learn." Barrett looked down at her hand. Dirt beneath her nails, skin cracked from cold water and scrub work. He took it in his calloused palm to calloused palm. "I want to," he said. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her fingers tightened around his. That night, he stayed by the hearth, his bedroll beside the straw mattress. When Kellen stirred, Barrett rose first to check the kettle, to stoke the fire. Eliza watched him from the shadows, her expression unreadable but calm. Summer turned, slow and honest. Barrett built a second table, smaller, for the children to sit at. He taught Katie how to shape a fishing line, and Kellen how to whittle without slicing too deep. Eliza took in sewing from a neighbor 5 miles off, riding there once a week with Samuel's mule and returning with needles tucked through her sleeve and coin in her pocket. One afternoon, Barrett returned from digging post holes to find Eliza kneeling in the garden, her skirt stained with soil, her hair loose and curling behind her ears. She looked up, shielding her eyes. "You're late. Fence gave me trouble." "You always say that." Barrett set down the spade. "It's always true." She stood, brushing her hands on her apron. "You've been here nearly 2 months. You planning on making it 3? He stepped closer, dirt falling from his boots. "I was figuring on all the months." Her mouth parted, just enough to let the wind in. "You mean it?"
"Ido."
She reached for his collar, pulling him down just enough to kiss him, slow and without hurry. The kind of kiss that says, "I've waited long enough." His hands found her waist, steady and sure, and there was nothing rushed about the way they fit together. The wind picked up across the field, bending the stalks but not the woman in his arms. Barrett kissed her again, and this time, he didn't pull away. They married beneath the cottonwood behind the house, with Katie holding wildflowers and Kellen carrying the ring Samuel had carved from hickory. The preacher rode in from town and left with a pie Eliza had baked that morning. There were no guests, no music, just the 4 of them and the wide, open sky. Barrett wore his cleanest shirt. Eliza wore the same dress she'd worn when she'd first stepped down from the wagon, mended now at the hem. That night, they sat under the stars, her hand in his, the children asleep inside. "I thought I'd have to carry everything alone," she said. Barrett leaned his shoulder against hers. "You don't." "And you," she asked, "still don't know how to stay?" He kissed her temple. "I know now." They built a porch by the end of that year and a chicken coop the year after. The garden grew full and wild, with beans curling up posts and potatoes thick in the soil. Kellen ran stronger each season, his laugh bright and clear. Katie learned to read by candlelight, her voice soft and certain. When the wind rolled across the prairie, Barrett would sometimes stand at the edge of the field and listen. He'd listen not for what was lost, but for what he had found. And Eliza would come to stand beside him, her hand slipping into his like it had always belonged there. They never wandered again.